So I'd like to get a sense from this group about what you think of the system as it is today. It's obviously already changing. There are already challenges that are arising that weren't in existence a few years ago. So you're already having to adapt to change. What is good about the current system? What are your challenges? What do you like and what don't you like about the regulatory system, the policy system that we have now? Anyone like to kick that one off? Yeah.
Sure, I'll kick it off. I'm Ava Karvinen. Over the last 20 years, I've served on many boards, including AMPIA, Dock National, Dock Alberta. I'm a voluntary board member of a labor union that serves the industry as well in Edmonton, and I work as a producer and teach in post-secondary in the industry. And so it's a big, huge question. It's one that we've all been thinking a lot about, and I guess the first thing I'll begin with is the obvious. There's the big white elephant across the border that's a part of all of our lives. So before Dexter even came to Canada, everybody knew what Dexter was. So as Canadian content creators, that's the kind of stuff we're up against, is the branding that happens at all levels, that it's not just appearing on television, that we're seeing it in print and electronic. So we're already aware of what the content is before we get it. So there's a bit of a desire that's being created and nurtured for us as consumers to want to consume that content. So as a Canadian content producer, the challenges we face is how do we get noticed in that, unlimited offerings that are out there. Challenges I see for myself as a content creator is when I go and surf through my PVR, I can't always tell what's Canadian, find stuff that I want to find. Some stuff appears on multiple channels, so that's a bit of a challenge. I think broadcasters are losing their brand, so CSI is on, I don't know, probably 8+ channels. I think the content is more the brand now than the broadcast channel. So, I mean, that can be a plus. And I guess because I'm leaving early, I'll do my Vulcan mind meld unload here.
Okay.
I think with searchability, the other question we have is broadcasters aren't always promoting our content, so we run into challenges. We know on-air promos helps drive audience numbers, but yeah, we don't always get on-air promos. We don't always get a lot of notice when our content is going to be on air to help promote the broadcasts. In many cases, we're responsible for a lot of the promotions. Yet it's pretty hard to do with our smaller budgets that are servicing, online, on-demand, having to create new media content and describe video and all these things, and we're working with it seemingly less and less money all the time. What is working is, I think there's still a desire for Canadians to see the content. There's some really fantastic Canadian shows that I think are doing well, but I think Canadians don't even realize it is Canadian. And I think that's exciting for me, is that I don't think necessarily Canadians need to say, yeah, this is Canadian to want to watch it. I just think it has to be a good show that's getting some profile, and I think we're seeing that with some of those international co-productions that have been running on primetime television, dramatic series in the last couple of years. So I think that's good on the Canadians to see that kind of stuff happening. But yeah, that's I'll just throw that out there for starters. And metadata tags, I think the tagging, the searchability is all a big issue. I think maybe we should be looking at Netflix, their model. They have, I think, 6 full-time taggers in Canada that do nothing but put metadata information with the content. And I think if we can do that, we'll help audiences find content. And I think now with technology, we should be able to integrate that somehow within the platforms that we're viewing content on.
Okay. Promotion is a big issue. It's a focus of the chair of the commission, and it's something I want to get a chance to talk to today as well. Anyone else have a sense? Tom?
Tom Cox, independent producer from Calgary, and I guess what I feel is working currently in the regulatory system is that it nurtures diverse, independent Canadian voices. It is there to ensure that Canadian content continues to be created, developed, produced, and distributed from across the country in every genre and independently. And that's sometimes a flawed delivery system, but underlying that is the basic Broadcast Act, and the CRTC acts in defense of that act, and so more or less successfully. The challenges obviously come from the technological changes, the lack of borders, consumer desire for greater flexibility, and we all have to recognize that. So moving into the future, whether it's a similar kind of regulatory system, tweaks to the current regulatory system, or starting over, the same basic philosophy, in my view, needs to be upheld, and that is Canadians deserve to see Canadian stories told by Canadians. That's not to say that we don't also deserve to see everything else that's available on the planet. I love what's going on in television right now. Great storytelling. But presuming that part of our consumer choice is Canadian choice, then we do need, given the size of our market, given the cost of production, especially for big budget drama, which is what I do, we need a system that nurtures that and if need be, protects it. And so I think we have to be open to change, but underlying that, I would hope, remains the desire to have Canadians have access to Canadian stories.
Yes.
I'm Louis Charles Tran. I'm an ACTRA member, UDA, Union des Artistes, and also I do some producing for different videos I produce for the seniors. And I will wear my hat of a user. Forget about the actor, about the producer. I will talk about what I see as a basic. I see that the television as a a communication tool, as well as something that we can provide entertainment. I will explain that in short stories. We have to have more and more information those days. I think the television can be a tool which have instantaneity, something which can deliver the information quite rapidly and easily. And we're talking about TV, but we have many platforms which are used right now and will be developed. Also, another thing I would like to focus on is that we have to have the content which reflect the Canadian content, which is the duality linguistique, having the two realities, which is English and French. We have to put the emphasis as well on documentaries about the story, about the story of Canada, which makes the wealth of our country. It's the multiculturalism, but also this basic of history. And also what I would like to focus is about the aging. I'm just telling you different steps. I'm just jump from thing to the other, but there's a link between this the topics I'm talking about. The reality, the new trend is about the upcoming baby boomers, 15 plus. We have to put the emphasis as well on this intergenerational link from the youngsters to the older people. We have to think about as well as our actors, to have our script writers, having people who are working locally, to have our CBC Radio-Canada to produce, which they don't right now. They just they deliver the message, but we should have some projects leading to having these communities to work together. So that's the main goal I would see, that CRTC, just to reduce the let's say the structure, which is for me a big structure with a lot of rules, but at the end we have to focus on the basic, which is the users, the artists, the producers, and having those people to work together and starting locally. And I forgot to talk about the First Nations as well. So I think if we develop a certain way of providing information, having, let's say, the story of our country, and all a day-to-day communication about the needs we have in this country, I think we'll reach a big step. Thank you.
You mentioned, you talked about users, and when you talked about users, you actually, in my mind, identified the creators, the folks on one side of the TV, behind the TV, the creators of the programming. And of course, the great focus of the Commission and in this process is on consumers of that content. And there seems to be a perception that the demands of consumers, which are always increasing, are somehow different than the needs and demands of creators. That there's a disconnect between what consumers want and what creators want. Is that a fair assessment? And how do we address that?
Between what?
Well, is there a disconnect today between what consumers want from their television system and what Canadian creators want to be able to give to them? In the sense that, certainly in the comments that have been coming in the online forum from individual Canadians, there's been a strong focus on the desire to have more choice, to have more access to different kinds of programming, to have fewer of what they perceive as restrictions in the system on what they can access. They want to get things easier and cheaper. Is there a disconnect between what they want as consumers and what creators want out of the system too?
Well, my name's Francis Danbuter. I'm a director, writer, producer, actor. I think there will always be a disconnect because I'm not sure that consumers would know what they're missing unless we, as the keepers of the gate, let's say as creative artists, telling Canadian stories, as Tom says, unless we sort of have that opportunity to do that, I don't know that they would know what they were missing. And I would say that they might want all these things and they might not know what they could have, because if we relax any rules and just say, oh, the public just wants this. And my great example for this is always, and despite what Brian Adams said a while ago, the CRTC protecting Canadian music, I think it spawned this amazing music scene that we have in Canada that people, as Canadians, as content takers, are very proud of and very consumed with. I mean, we love our Canadian bands and our Canadian artists. That's a little obvious, but at the same token, if we had ever relaxed those rules, despite what Brian Adams says, he would have been a global hit anyway. I disagree with Brian. I think all of these artists would all say, without exception almost, that they got their foothold because of the CRTC. Because all these radio stations in Canada would be playing nothing but top 40 American playlists. That would be it. They wouldn't give a shit what we made or what we did. Unless you were the Guess Who and happened to bust through somehow, many years ago. I think the same thing is said for Canadian stories. If we relax those rules, assuming that they want more choice, they want to watch more American cop shows or whatever it is they want to watch, that we will lose our identity as a country. And we, as the keepers of the gate and the creators of Canadian content, have to fight for that, because we actually know that we have to tell our stories. They may not know that they need to hear their stories, but we know that we need to tell them, because that's what's in our guts, in our hearts as creators. We know that that's what we're here to do, that we're here to show them themselves. That's a healthy society, and that's our job. I don't know that it should all be up to them just because the kid goes to the candy store and says, this is shiny and that's good. He doesn't know that underneath in this little box is a secret little treasure called Canadian stories that he might actually identify with. And I go, in my own situation, always back to my stories, my feature films, things that I've directed for producers in this room like Tom, where Canadians will say, or fellow Albertans will say, oh, I saw that, I love that show. I really like it. They didn't even know it was made here. Yet I can see that passion for seeing themselves on the screen, seeing their stories on the screen, and there is a real love for that. So I don't know that we should get, I just hope the CRTC doesn't take all of that and dismiss our role and say, just because they want those things, that they should get all those things. We need to stand up for and fight for, as Tom said, the basics of what the CRTC was designed to do, which is tell us who we are.
I just wanted to add to what Fran's saying. When you mentioned that, you know, even as content creators, we don't always get to decide what kind of content we want, because I don't think we would have as much reality-style TV out there. What happens is Canadian broadcasters go on trends that are happening in the US. So they're basing, I think, a lot of their decisions on ratings and numbers that are reflected in America and how they can sell advertising, not necessarily what content creators want to create, because I think if we had more choice, you would see a lot more of our content out there, ways that we wanted to tell our stories, not necessarily in this packaged, formatted, franchised way of The Bachelors and The Survivors and Canada's Got Talent. I think you would see a lot more original ideas come, but I think for the broadcasters that are making those decisions, it's less risky to take stuff that's worked and already has branding. So when they bring it here, they're guaranteed some ad revenue, because ad revenue still is what's driving some of the business model here. And I think we just have to be careful too that as we move into other platforms, as we have these vertically integrated companies that have multi-level holdings, that they own print, they own telephone companies, they own cable, and they're primetime broadcasters, that as they're moving into these other environments, and let's say they move completely to the web, and we don't have Canadian content regulations right now with the ISPs, and as content creators, we aren't seeing any revenue come back to us from the ISPs, even though it's the same content that's being broadcast, that I think we really need to revisit the model and look at perhaps having some kind of tax for the ISPs that's similar to the broadcast model that helps support creation of Canadian content, so those Canadian stories can get out there and can get told, because I think it's our right as Canadians. The airwaves, how we look at them, that CRTC Broadcast Act may need to be modified slightly to reflect what's happening in the world today with how we access content.
And that's a great segue into as we move forward with this discussion. So we looked briefly at the system as it is today and had some comments about the opportunities and challenges today, but we were in a rapidly changing world where technology is creating new platforms that's giving consumers more choices. The chair of the commission, when he first started holding hearings, asked everyone that came before him about their vision of the future. He said, I'm in a role that's 5 years long. It'll wrap up in 2017. What do you see the world looking like, the broadcasting world looking like in 2017? Give me your view of the future, your vision of the future. So here's our opportunity in this setting to give our or your vision of the future. When this chairman's current tenure ends, subject to reappointment in 2017, what is the world going to look like in your business? What do you want it to look like in your business? In the back.
One of the things that we have to...
Can you identify yourself, please?
I'm sorry, I'm Luke Azevedo. I'm Commissioner of Film, Television, and Creative Industries out of Calgary.
Thank you.
I think one of the main things that we're going to have to deal with is consumption, is our ability to deliver that instant gratification. People are now binge watching. That's the reality of how our world is starting to change. You see it in the kids. They're looking at a product where they can watch as many episodes as they want over a period of a weekend, rather than waiting 13 to 18 weeks over a period of time to get them. So that's number one. With the amount of travel that we do into the States to try to attract work here, that then helps us maintain the Canadian base that we have here and keep our talent here. One of the things that we hear all the time is the battles now of how much content, what a distribution or broadcast license is worth now to a producer. So now we have producers that in some instances have to be chasing the dollars to be able to produce something rather than being able to bring something to the table and getting the dollars to produce it. So it's a bit of a shift that we've seen now. And I think that, from the perspective of how we're moving forward, we're seeing more and more capacity to distribute over the web. And that's our reality. I mean, that's what's happening now. That's how the kids are watching it. That's how it's moving forward. So we have to have the capacity, I think, in Canada to be able to do those distributions. We here in Alberta have a system that allows us to access monies to develop projects and have an audience that can be a digital distribution audience. I think that needs to become more commonplace across the country as it's starting to be across North America. And I think that's the world that we're moving into.
Who else has a vision of 2017?
Terry Winnicott, producer from Edmonton. I think that we agree that the world is changing. The original Broadcast Act no longer holds true, makes any sense. And the sale of Hockey Night in Canada is a prime example of that. It's just, things are shifting all over the place. But we do know that Canadian programming is important, and we do know that we want to preserve it. In order to preserve it, we need to be able to continue to invest in it. So how do we protect, to use the word that Tom used, how do we protect Canadian production when when that's disappearing? That framework that we used to have, the original Cable Production Fund, which became the Canadian Television Fund, which became the Canadian Media Fund, was essentially, pooling the taxes from the broadcasters. Now, as Ava says, the internet service providers aren't governed by that at all. So whether we subsidize Canadian production from a government level, or whether we continue to try and enforce broadcasters to produce a certain level of Canadian content, I think is the question. Is it? The issues of regulation and governance are also something that I'm not equipped to speak to, but I think are things that we have to address as a nation in terms of how we deliver entertainment and information in Canada to Canadians. Very disturbed when I read an article in the newspaper by a correspondent who's gone to Syria, and he's actually paid by a non-profit organization to write for CanWest Global. CanWest has no foreign correspondent to go to Syria and report to me the news in a what used to be considered an unbiased and journalistic manner. Now I'm reading somebody who is part of a non-profit agency sponsored to go. That's considered newsworthy news. And there was something else there.
We've got some young folks here with us, and how are you guys accessing your content now, and how do you think you're going to be accessing that content in a few years down the road?
I'm Brandon Evans. I'm a graduate of McEwen. I don't even have cable. I find anything that I want to see by streaming it, either through Netflix or just on the internet, and I don't even, if there's something that I really want to watch, I'll just go out and buy the DVD box set or whatever and just watch it that way, because I find that what you were saying, people want things instantaneously. They want to be able to watch as many episodes as they want to watch all at the same time without having to wait a week for the next one to come out. At least I do. And yeah, that's kind of how I watch things.
I'm Jen Jelps. I graduated Grant MacEwan with a year ahead of Brendan. And yeah, I have Netflix. I have a TV, but it just collects dust. I don't have cable. I think we have like the Peasant Vision 4 channels that nobody watches. But yeah, Netflix, and then everything else I just stream online. And I know for a couple Canadian content shows that I just recently found out about, they weren't played during prime time, and I didn't know any advertising for them or anything. There was a show in Vancouver called The Beat about police in Vancouver. That was something I was interested in and would have watched, but I had no idea to play it at like 4 a.m. on some channel, just so they can get their American content in. But I think something like that, hopefully in the future, will change, but definitely Netflix is the way it's going to be going. And I've recently started watching X-Files, and I can power through all 9 seasons in 1 week if I really want to. But I think that's where things will be going.
And what does that mean for Canadian programming? What if you guys want to create Canadian programming in the future, what are your opportunities going to be, and how are you going to reach your audiences?
Online. Everything will have to be online. Yeah.
So let me get back to Ava's point about promotion. And when I look ahead to 2017 and beyond, it really is, I mean, I think I would love to see a universe that's more diverse in terms of storytelling. I would love to see Canadian stories be part of that. So just very practically, looking at the size of our market, we have 33 million people, 25, 26 English speaking, and French speaking, so we're between the two, 33, next door to the most sophisticated market on earth for entertainment, with 300 million. So how do we simply compete at a very practical level so that you know where that programming is? Because if enough people know about it, maybe it'll stay on the air. So it really is a matter of continuing to have a system that not only nurtures production, but is sophisticated enough to allow us to compete globally, and so that when you're online, you can find it, and you can support it, and you can watch it, and you can create it and put it online. I think it does get down to very practical market sense at one level, and maybe that's the way that it's best to frame it for the government's sake. It's simply about fair competition and all of the things that attach to that in order to make that happen.
Joe.
I'm curious whether our 3 students from Grant MacEwan care whether what's available to them is Canadian or not. Does that enter your consciousness as you, and why do you think that is? It really doesn't matter if there's Canadian content from your primary streaming source as opposed to traditional cable and...
Well, I don't, I wouldn't base my opinion on the show if it was Canadian or not. I have no problems obviously watching Canadian content, so it just doesn't really cross my mind. I watch what I like, and if it happens to be Canadian, that's awesome.
I think if I knew that there was more Canadian shows, I would watch them, but a lot of Canadian shows, like I said, are played at like 2 a.m., 4 a.m. and aren't advertised, so I don't know if they're there. But yeah, I think I would, because I'm a Canadian and I'm proud of that, and I want to support Canadian things. So obviously it still has to be something I'm interested in, but yeah, I think if I knew that they were Canadian or Alberta, I like to support local things, and if I knew that they were there, I'd definitely be interested in watching them and seeing what we produce, because that's our home, so.
I think I'm Bree Reichert, also a Grant MacEwan graduate. I think things like Netflix and stuff, they'll have lists of Canadian movies and stuff like that, and I think we could see more of that, like have just identify the Canadian content more.
I think, following up on what Tom's saying, I don't think it's about protecting our product. I think it's about sponsoring it, enabling it, enhancing it, and marketing it. I think we have some great Canadian producers here in this room, moreover this province and this country. I think the opportunities for us is how do we find a way and incentivize the broadcasters to bring us up to a level that they do what they do for the American shows. I mean, we have some great quality programs here, and it's like what this young man was saying. It's not about where it was produced or the viewing. It's about the quality of the program. So how do we make sure that these people understand where the programming is, where, you know, and how to access that programming, whether it's over the web, whether it's, you know, the broadcasters, how do we incentivize it and support the production to a level, giving them the amount of money necessary to produce at that quality level. So that's, I think, from my perspective, is where we're lacking.
So you talk about creating an incentive for the broadcasters to do that, whereas the historical system is to regulate them, to require them to do it. It's the stick rather than the carrot. Is there a carrot out there?
Well, I think there has to be. I mean, these are organizations that are dependent on their Canadian marketplace for their livelihood. You're buying their programming, you're buying their channels, you're buying their system. So what do we do to be able to make it so that Canadian product is showcased to Canadians beyond what, you know, the CBC is doing? How do we create a system that isn't, you know, like you said, isn't the stick, right? It's more of a, you know, putting something in place that allows them to want to show this programming and to, you know, include it in their system, and to then turn to the producers and have them engaged to make that program.
But Jay, the incentive was there, and it was called the public airwaves. And you are one of a select group that have access to the public airwaves. And in return for that right, that oligarchy, you therefore must contribute back to the system. But if the incentive system is breaking down due to competition and more players in the room, then we need to revisit what is to motivate Canadian broadcasters who arguably run 75% American content at discount prices that no other country would allow, right? A $10 million program you get to run for $150,000. Where does that happen anywhere else on the planet? So I think the incentive system was there because you had protection in order to generate revenue. That's where the license to print money came. That paradigm has changed.
And so how do you as creators deal with that changing paradigm? There are more players in the room. Does that mean more opportunities for you? Do you still have to rely on the broadcasters? There are all these other platforms. What about those?
I think the broadcast model is nearing, the current broadcast model is nearing its end. And I think it's going to be up to, you're going to see much more private investment. You can argue whether the reasons are correct or not, but everybody keeps talking about branded entertainment, partnerships. And I was watching hockey the other day. Sorry. I couldn't count the number of logos on my screen at any given second. And that really changed when you watch the old-time games, right, about what's going on. So I don't know what the answer is, but I do know the direction it's going. I don't think we can depend on government to continue to subsidize to the level we have now. I think it's stable for the next short while. And I think there's going to be more opportunity for the private sector, and that's in two areas, in terms of commercial, but also can the government maybe change the kind of incentives that might be available into an investment regime as opposed to a grant regime, if you understand what I'm saying.
At the heart of it is funding, of course. You need money to make programs. You need more money to make great programs. That's one possible approach to dealing with the funding model. Where else is the money going to come from?
Before you leave the last topic, I just want to say my fear is in this whole branded environment, and we're seeing more and more product placement. You're going to lose documentaries. And documentaries speak to Canadians about Canadians. They tackle issues that Canadians need to know about. And I think Canadians have a right to know about what's going on in their country and to have a forum and a place to discuss it. And I think documentaries help provide that forum. And I think, once again, Canadians need to have a voice. And I think within branded entertainment, they're not going to have much of a voice. And when that voice is being driven by advertising revenue, and when you have the population of California sort of in Canada, we're never going to have the ad revenue. So our content is always going to be looking, for the most part, like it was produced with slightly less. When we are dealing with talent, if you look at an episode of Friends back in the day and each actor made $1 million an episode, in Canada, that's kind of where drama is, somewhere to the $1.5 million per hour. It's hard to compete. And I just worry that all this branding, product placement and stuff we're seeing, and the consolidation of media that a documentary will be gone and Canadians will not be able to see themselves represented. It's how many people outside of Canada form their first impressions about Canada is through seeing documentaries. And I've heard that from many immigrants who've moved to Canada. They've saw documentaries about Canada and that's why they decided to move here. And so while I think branded entertainment is good for certain types of content, however, I think for documentary we have to be very careful, and I think documentary should have a priority with the CRTC.
Which raises the question, because I agree
Yeah.
totally, which raises the question, because we are one of the few countries in the world that have such a rich and glorious documentary tradition with NFB and CBC, but then that raises the question of our public institutions. We had a National Film Board that was created to serve a certain goal with Pearson. So what is the role in all of this quagmire, commercial quagmire, for our public broadcaster, the CBC? Everybody talks about opportunity because now hockey is off the table, which is huge for the CBC, positive, negative, anyway, but there will be a shift at the CBC. Is this the time in the discussion to be talking about the role of a public broadcaster as to just sort of focus on the private sector?
I agree with what you're saying. We have perhaps to make some, to reevaluate the values or the goals that the institution are brought for. So you're talking about l'Office National du Film, the National Film Board, which is quite important, and I think it's a good way to have it more accessible. I'm looking forward to be involved in projects, to reflect, to do some producing and all that. But what I was proposing, it's not in their mission or you have to change to respond to, like you're saying, within 5 years there will be so many changes done. So we have to, let's say, what is real today might not be true tomorrow. So we have to shift to match what we need, what are the needs, what are the demography is. And we're talking about the documentary, but when I'm talking about also the services we need to be which are accessible to us, it has to be let's say reflecting the reality. That's what I see.
What I hear is there's a need for more from this system. There's a need for more documentaries. There's a need for more from the CBC. There's a need for more funding. But where's it going to come from? How do you accomplish more in a world where choice is much greater than it is today? The ability to access content from all kinds of sources from around the world. How does the Commission, how will the Commission ensure that there is a place to do more of these Canadian programs or these styles of programs in that kind of environment?
Well, I think you just have to be prepared to support that system. I don't think you can just leave it all up to the marketplace. I'd like to think that. I think our stories should be universal and people should be able to watch them from wherever they are and say, hey, I like that story. I don't care if it was Canadian, as you said, you just want to watch good stuff, right? Our big problem, as other people have said, is how do we get our stuff seen? So maybe a concentration of energy on just awareness of here's the product, here it is. I mean, in some ways, sometimes we've been ghettoized by the CBC. Somebody would say to you, oh, is it a CBC program? And you'd go, well, yeah, it's playing on the CBC. And they go, oh, it was almost a bad thing at one time. And yet, over the years, we've produced tremendous television. And still they're producing tremendous television. I'm not sure we're getting our best bang for the buck because I think there's too much infrastructure. And I think they should just have a room with a few people in it handing out money to guys and let us make our stuff, and we'd be better off in the long run. But that's another story. I just don't know that you can leave it up to the whims of the marketplace. I think you do have to, as a country, be prepared to spend a little bit to say, we're going to be heard one way or the other. We're going to let our artists speak. We're going to support them. We're going to give them platforms. We're going to get their We're gonna advertise their product and help them get it out there. Otherwise, it will go the way of top 40 radio, which is what would have happened in the radio industry. We would only be listening to the Beach Boys or whoever came along at that time from other places. Yes, we have a global platform now. We have stuff coming at us from every direction, but we need to be a part of that. We can't just leave it up to the consumer, because I think what's going on here is thinly veiled, pardon me, political move perhaps to say, let's hear what the public wants. They want more choice. They don't care about Canadian programming. Let's kill the goddamn golden egg. We don't need the CBC. They just want to see what they want to see. I'm being very open here. I think that's possible. It could be just political, that we're just going to ask these questions of the public, and the public's going to say, I don't really care what I watch. I just want to watch good stuff. Well, we don't need those things then. Why support it? Let the marketplace dictate. In that case, then the only thing you can do is really open it up for private investment, because that's the only hope we have then, is that you're going to give tax incentives and let us at least try to make stuff. But I think that's a big mistake. We have to protect our voice in this world, and we have to have a voice in this world. That's a sign of a healthy society. We have to be able to look at our bumps and our bruises and our Rocky Mountains and our scenery and everything about our country and analyze it and look at it in good universal story form and say, that's us. I hope they're watching that down south, because I don't want to just be like them.
Well, doesn't it?
Sorry, over here.
Sorry. I'm Lindsay McNeil, Communications Coordinator for AMPIA and a filmmaker and screenwriter. I love to speak on that too, because I think the thing that really hurts Canadian programming is stuff like HBO. And I think as myself that only watches television online and movies online, and binge watches, as Luke had mentioned, I will suffer through a degraded quality of a program. I will hunt it out, I will find it if the story is good. To me, it's all about story. And I think what's happened is, you know, the things that get funded in Canada do have this broad Canadian identity or regional specific stories that are not as popular and cannot compete with things like Game of Thrones and what else do I like? Downton Abbey, for instance, you know, things like that where it's all about the story. Everything can connect, or everybody can connect to it on a personal level, and it's not a forced Canadian identity. I think people really react strongly to that, just maybe for my generation. I think if we fund more storytellers, Canadian storytellers, producers, companies, and maybe hit some more of those niche markets. I have a huge popular show right now on the Space Network, I believe, is Taught in the Book of Pure Evil. And, you know, it is a very niche market, but it is huge in the male demographic 18 to 35, which is what most producers are trying to go for. People hunt that down, they want to watch that. To take more creative risks in our storytelling and actually fund the screenwriters, I know that's biased on my part, but actually take some risks. In our filmmaking in Canada, we are known for David Cronenberg and, you know, like all of these crazy, edgy kind of films that come out of here, and our actors, I think we could really harness that and let people know that film and television coming out of Canada can be weird, can be edgy, can be something that you want to watch, not just, you know, something happening on the prairies. I think that's important.
I guess I'm just struck by the role, now that I'm thinking about the question, struck by the role of the CRTC, which is a regulator. As opposed to me, what seems to be the fundamental question, which is government public policy. Once you have government public policy on a certain issue, the question then becomes, how do we implement, how do we manage that? And then we have a CRTC to manage public policy, which is the Broadcasting Act. So it's more of a question, and I have no idea what the answer is. Has public policy federally, nationally shifted? Is it about to shift? How could the CRTC make rules against a public policy that may be unclear? Do you see around the regulatory versus public policy, the conflict? So how far can the CRTC go in terms of regulating as opposed to managing and helping to implement public policy of a broadcast act that's from help me out here, 92?
To the point over here, and it's been the historical desire of the creative community to have Canadians be able to make Canadian stories for Canadian audiences. Will that last? Is that something that can be done in the future? What will be a Canadian story in 5 years' time?
A Canadian story is a story that comes from a Canadian mind. Cronenberg is a prime example of a great Canadian filmmaker. Has he ever made a film that was set in or about Canada? I don't know that he has, but he has a fantastically fertile imagination and a distinctly Canadian imagination, I would argue. And that's what makes a Canadian program. It's far easier to realize such a vision in feature films than it is in television, which is all about attracting advertisers, and which is all about mimicking other successful things that have attracted advertisers. Television is not known to be bold, except in subscription services, or the cases of subscription services like HBO. So there is a bit of a conundrum in terms of being bold and really taking the shackles off in terms of Canadian storytelling for television, as long as the advertisers are the goal, not the audience, or the audience is there in service of the advertisers, or whatever that model is, monetizing the show. So, you know, television isn't feature film and will always have its own sort of market forces, but my own sense is a Canadian story comes from a Canadian mind, period. If they happen to be about the prairies, fantastic. Fargo was about the prairies. Does that mean it wasn't a great story? No, it's a fantastic story. Tennessee Williams, I mean, we have our Farley Mowat's, we have our own great storytellers who also are rooted in place. That's great. But the real question is, how do we compete with those stories? How do we take them to the world and have them compete on an international stage? They have to be able to compete at a monetary level in terms of the creation, in terms of production. That's a challenge in a very small market. So we do have to continue to frame our discussion about support in terms of our market size versus the rest of the world. And certain genres may do better in a very low budget environment, but certain genres will not do very well at all unless we are able to achieve sort of threshold budget levels. So that's the conundrum. It's not about the quality of the minds at work, it's about market access.
Does the system prevent you in any way from telling those bold stories? Are you constrained by the existing system and the kind of stories that you can tell, and should that system change so that you can tell different stories?
Well, I don't know. At one time we definitely were. I mean, I remember finishing a feature film and being asked by Telefilm Canada, what do you want to do next? And I said, I want to do this comedy. And it was set in a nowhere kind of environment. It would be just like, it would be universal in the sense that it's a universal story, but it was set in kind of a cold northern clime. It didn't reek of Canadianism at all, but it had a good universal story. And I was told, well, we're not doing comedy right now. I mean, they dictated to me that I shouldn't do that piece, and I still, at some level, I think we get dictated to that this is what's popular, we should do this, or that's not what we're doing right now. I mean, I know of a series that I created one time. It was absolutely wonderful. And again, the thing came, well, we're not doing comedy right now. I thought, well, what else should we do? I mean, Canadians do comedy, we do it great. Let us do our shit, man. Like, why are you telling us what to do? You're pushing paper, you guys. Let us do our thing. So I think, you know, Tom's right. I mean, it comes from the mind. And don't get me wrong, when I say we need to tell Canadian stories, I am not saying, quote, stories with waving grain necessarily. If that universal story is set in a grain field, as Tom says, Fargo is in the middle of a prairie, and it works, that's all that matters to us. We absolutely do crave, as any filmmaker or any creator of content does, not just to provide entertainment to Canadians, But we hope for the film that's going to become a smash hit and be seen by everybody in the world. That's our goal. We never sit down and say, well, I'm going to make something just for Canada. That's not what we do. We shouldn't be doing that if we are. I don't know that they are facilitating that openness. The thing that might be facilitating it is because of the great difference in platforms now, kids are watching stuff on their phones, they're watching it on little computer screens, big screen TVs. The thing that I find interesting, because I've got kids of all ages there in the teen years, is the quality of that content. The look of it isn't as important as whether it fits the story and if the story's interesting. So people, you know, are shooting stuff with lower budgets. If it goes to a certain platform, that works fine. If it's meant for HBO, well, it's probably not going to work because there's a certain look there that's been achieved that you have to stand up to. But on these devices, you can possibly make a show for very little money, but if the imagination behind it is so incredible that people, like they say, search it out and want to see it, then the world is wide open, right? But we still need to be able to do those experiments. We still need to support the creative minds, or it'll just get washed over, because I think it's just way easier, as was referred to our AMPIA president here, to just go out and buy the shit. Why should we bother trying to make it? You know, because it's really easy for content broadcasters to just buy this stuff and not go through all of this rigmarole of, oh God, here comes Tom again with an idea, or, you know, I mean, it would be just easier for them, but they make a lot of money, so they should kick a little back into the creative side of it and keep it going. I think, that's just me.
I think we have to take the risk. And why saying that is that we don't have always to reproduce what is reproduced somewhere else. We have, as a user, when I call the user, I'm Mr. Nobody will reach the TV or all the platforms are accessible to find something interesting. It has to have a certain have to be appeal, have something which is interesting to me. So we have to find out exactly what the consumer needs. So we know when people, we're talking about later about the hockey, okay, that's something, that's sports. But in the drama or in fiction or what, we know the type of audience we're looking for. We have to invest or to enhance the quality of the product we want to deliver, and to see what the people want as well. Of course, if we have the dumping from United States, because it's what I call dumping, because they sell their products at a cheap price to have it, and it's not compatible with the price we can produce here. We have to remove, I think, the percentage of the content we promote on TV or all the platforms. We have to put the emphasis on the content, Canadian content. That's, to me, it's something interesting. And also government has to invest, because it's a quality of life, it's a quality of it's to enhance the quality of the society as well, because if people are appealed with what's going on with their neighbors or what in their country, they feel that they belong to something, to a country. We have to invest. There's a cost for that. Many countries are investing a lot of money in their broadcasting. I was told in Europe, I don't recall the names of the country, but here we don't invest as much as some countries are investing. We are capable to invest $40 billion to buy some planes for the army and all that. I think we can have a piece of this budget to be delivered to the quality of the production we can have in Canada in broadcasting and also producing. So that's my point.
I'm just, excuse my ignorance if this already takes place, but would it be possible if some kind of chain show or already branded show comes into Canada and then gets specially taxed because it's not original programming, and then that money would go to fund original programming? So if you have very successful programs like So You Think You Can Dance Canada or The Real Housewives of God knows where. That money is kind of like it's almost like accepting the beast, but kind of taking something from it to put it towards the real Canadian identity stuff.
That's kind of
Is that
what the
possible?
CMF does by taking cable bill. Basically, the private broadcasters,
But is it
in
specific
return
to
for being able to simulcast American programming, put money back into the system that pays Canadian programs in the region to produce so much Canadian programming. The question is, would they do that if it wasn't regulated? Are there incentives that might get them to continue to do that without regulation? These are the questions.
I'd like to come back to our graduates, and they told us that they watch everything online. Are you going to be producing only for online in the future? Is that the only platform you see?
I wouldn't say it's the only platform, but if I was to produce something, even in the next 5 years, there would definitely be a strong web base present, either like webisodes and all social media and stuff like that, because that's, yeah, like I said, my TV just sits there and collects dust. Everything I watch is online, everything I do is online, everything like that, so it would definitely be, I would definitely still hope to have it on some broadcast network on TV, but definitely still be a strong web presence for sure. So.
And do you think you're going to need some help in ensuring that you're able to make those shows, or you feel pretty confident that because right now the digital world is not regulated, the Commission has decided to take a hands-off approach to online content as of now. Are you quite comfortable with that?
Really?
What's your favorite show right now?
On TV?
Yeah.
Probably Game of Thrones.
So you're watching it online,
Mm-hmm.
but it's not exactly a webisode.
No, no. And like I like shows, like I know I'm obviously a film nerd and I look for
Right.
continuity things and how it's shot and all the beside,
Right.
that's just me. I know never everybody's like that, but I like shows that are a strong story and that are well shot.
Yep.
Like American Horror Story, they do all kinds of crazy angles, and so I like things like that as well. But like, yeah, the quality for web does not have to be as strong for
Right.
the TV.
We're talking $3 to $5 million an episode.
Yeah, it's crazy amounts of money, but yeah.
So I wanted to jump in and respond to your question is about making Canadian films for Canadian audiences. I think that we must make Canadian films for a global audience, and we do, and we have done for a long time. The National Film Board did a documentary, If You Love This Planet, many, many years ago, and that was an international sensation. I think that if we look at models that are working, like the BBC, and you know, we talk about some of these huge budget shows, but let's look at Downton Abbey. That's an international co-pro, distinctly British. And there is no reason why we can't have many more of those coming out of Canada. But we have to have a model, and perhaps the model already exists, but it's broken. Perhaps we have already got the CBC and the National Film Board, and perhaps those are places where the investment has to get doubled, tripled, and quadrupled with the streamlining as Francis says, of the bureaucracy.
In one room.
But an investment in production, not only dramatic, but documentary and various genres, comedy. But maybe we have to also look outside of the cultural industry model to other industries across the country, and how Canadian protectionism nurtures and supports, subsidizes those industries, like the Canadian beef producers, or the canola producers, or the steel manufacturing industry, or the potash industry. Maybe there are models of that include perhaps taxation, perhaps marketing, and maybe we have an opportunity now with the the Broadcasting Act having to be re-examined to actually do something that does create and promote Canadian storytelling on the screen. And so I think that you will hear the story, though, from producers, is that Canadian stories are meant to be told not just to Canadians, but to the world.
Do you have access to that audience?
I don't think so. Very, very little, I think, of Canadian production gets that international audience.
And why is that? What's the barrier to that?
Money. Of course, if you've got $5 million per episode, you're going to be able to move that show, including marketing it internationally, including bringing in international co-production partners. When you're getting, a broadcast license that is $30,000, what can you make?
So if we come back to the initial question about the future and what the TV system of the future will look like or should look like, are you optimistic? Is the glass half full or is the glass half empty for you? And if it's half empty, how do we make it half full? If it's half full, how do we make it full?
I think I will be in 5 years. I'll be 67, and I don't want to say, oh, I have to keep this and that. I just have to flow, to follow the flow. What I want to say is that, according to what this lady and this gentleman was saying about the new technology and all that, of course, if it's the new trend, the new way to have the information, all that, I will just use the new platforms available, the upcoming ones, because in 5 years there might be huge developments in the technology as well. But my point is that TV has perhaps a certain utility, but it will. I'm more putting the emphasis on the product itself. Really important to pay attention to the product instead of the instruments. The instruments will be the new technology and all that. We have to start from the point A to the point B. Point A is the product, and the point B is the users. And the stream we are having there, that's the technology. So I think we have to make sure that we have the institutions which are properly, let's say, maintained, like CBC, all the telefilm, all these industry, to have these creators, to have these people to enhance the product, to create something which is related to this new technology, which is accessible instantly. We're talking about the drama and the film production and all that. We have to put more the emphasis on the short information, and I think we'll have let's say more access, or will be more deserved that way. But within 5 years, I think that will be the new reality of completely different what we're having right now, the TV. So anyway, that's.
I just think that, as Einstein said, creativity is more important than knowledge. I don't think we can try to plan anything. I think we let our creative people run with it, so to speak, and if they're good, they'll take us the right place. Their products will go to the larger world, and it will hit all the platforms. And I think when we start to think we know something in this business, just like they always say in Hollywood that nobody knows anything, then we're screwed. I mean, I think Einstein was right. Creativity is way more powerful than knowledge. In this industry particularly, the creative mind is always the first and foremost important thing, in my opinion. You can follow the trends, you can make another, you know, Housewives of Vancouver because they made one down in LA, so now we need one in Vancouver because they're different types of bitches or whatever they are. Rich people. You know, it's all fake anyway, it's not reality. So we can do that, and that there is demand and there is pressures for people to follow those patterns. But I think what's more important is to create your own patterns with your own imagination. And as these young people said, younger people, I don't like to think I'm too old yet, that they watch what grabs them. So I mean, I think your creative people, if they're in touch with what's going on and they're absorbing the world and answering back as good shaman, they will send out the right information and the right stories, and people will grab them and say, hey, I like that. I mean, why is Game of Thrones, which is set way back, so popular now? That's all about, you know, butchering each other and spiking each other in the back and screwing your neighbor's friend, and it's just what's going on forever in the world, really. So it's just universal in content. We could do that right here in Canada. I mean, it's all that going on all over the place.
Producers are, I think by nature, glass half full individuals. I don't think we would do it otherwise for any length of time. We seem to complain a lot, but I think at our core we're optimistic. And we're also, I think, highly adaptable. So we'll always find a way to tell stories. The question is, will they be the Sistine Chapel or scratches on a cave wall, or, you know, something in between? And obviously what we want to create is a system that allows for as many kinds of expression as possible, and at all budget levels and in all genres and from all parts of the country. We'll find a way. It's just, what will the governors be on that? We want to make sure the governors are non-existent or as stretched as possible. We have as much latitude as possible for the creative people to continue to act as our shaman.
I've asked questions to try to stimulate the discussion. Are there any questions I've missed? Do you have questions that think need to be asked in this forum that you'd like to put out there for discussion?
Well, I guess I just have a concern to kind of put forward as well. You know, I think the internet has become very revolutionary in the terms of creative people don't have to go through the same middlemen anymore to produce their content. I think even producers are starting to become irrelevant in a little aspect in terms of if someone wants to make something their way, they have access to do it, upload it, and then build their fan base. And I'm concerned that there's not enough, I guess, Canadian risk-taking or support for those people, that we will be snapped up by the American market and picked up. There's so many Canadian writers working in Los Angeles right now for American television. Why don't we have them here producing original content for us? I don't know how to fix that. I'm new to this, but that's just something I'm concerned about. I might get snapped up. It's sad, scary.
Well, that's just part of the North American Free Trade Agreement. They take all the great creative people down to LA.
Market forces.
Yeah.
Joe?
I'm thinking, bring it back to public policy. I just want to bring that back again. Let me try this analogy. In this country called Canada, when we wanted to grow it and open it, we started with the Courrier de Bois, the fur traders across the country. Then somebody figured out a railroad, right? And somebody figured out a microwave system and a national airline in order to bring the country together. And I think we're at this point in our communication system where this is the equivalent, but with much greater impact. So our public policy as a country and how we communicate with each other and how we communicate with the world is the same thing as building a Trans-Canada Highway, the same thing as building the CPR railway from coast to coast, which brings us together as Canadians. We saw all these needs. We saw the need of the Center for a Film Board, for a public broadcaster. Certain things weren't being done. My point being, it's really hard to wrestle and tweak with a system that is underpinned by public policy and a lack of clarity or commitment to public policy of our broadcasting system. And it really comes back to the Bill 92. Right. So I think that's the frustration I feel. You have public policy versus implementation and regulation of that policy. And those two seem to be confused and unclear.
Anyone else? Well, I think we can wrap it up now. I'd like to finish with Tom's point that as creators, as producers, you're glass half full people. And that the process that is being undertaken now by the CRTC is going to result in a system where the water level is rising in that glass for you as creators and at the same time for Canadians as consumers. And it's going to happen because you participate in the process in events like this. So appreciate your candor, your comments, your participation. And with that, I think we'll wrap it up. Appreciate it.
Thanks.